you submit a proof of loss on every claim, even if they don't ask for it? I think you should. I'm Matt Mulholland. That's Remington Huggins. And this is our signed sworn proof of loss episode. Let's do it. I mean, the only way that they can deny the proof of loss is if there is a technicality on it. This has become a proof of loss episode.
This has, but...
And that's okay.
I don't think I've ever had a proof of loss accepted.
So, since this is now a proof of loss episode, let's go into this.
Yeah. And maybe
often.
I have, but...
Yeah, that's what they say. So,
yeah.
But accepted and rejected, very, very important statements, some of these things. Disagreed with. A carrier is not allowed to reject a proof of loss unless there is a technical deficiency in the information provided or the form. If it doesn't meet all the conditions of the policy, they don't answer one of the questions that's in that list on the conditions, then it is technically deficient and can be rejected. If it isn't technically deficient, but they just disagree with the amount of loss that's on there, they can't reject it for that. They can disagree with the amount of loss, but they can't reject it. And I think that's a very important distinction, because if you reject a form, you're basically saying, we didn't receive it. This isn't sufficient to be called a proof of loss. And so every single time I had an adjuster say, obviously we're rejecting this, no. Let's pause there and talk about how you can reject it. Are you just disagreeing with the amount of loss, or are you rejecting the form because we did something wrong on it? And I would force them to answer that, because I want to have on record that they received a sufficient proof of loss on a specific date. There is there's payment terms that are in the policy that start off with, we will pay within X amount of days, 30, 60, 90, after we receive your signed sworn proof of loss and an agreement is made. The agreement isn't officially made just because they received a proof of loss. It's a separate thing. But they have to receive a signed sworn proof of loss and accept that they have received it in order for any of the rest of that to start. And then you come to an agreement. And the undisputed amounts might be agreed to, and they should make a payment within 30, 60, 90 days, whatever that language in the payment provision says. And then you could have additional agreements. But it has to start off with that signed sworn proof of loss. So I think it's very important, if they ever say that they're rejecting it, that you fight against that language.
Yeah, and you could, just like Matt said, just say, why? Please tell me the deficiency in this proof of loss. I like that. And insurance companies don't know that. And what I'm trying to say is the reason why they're rejecting proofs of loss is because they don't like the RCV value that you're putting on the proof of loss. And
you don't talk down to the adjuster on this, because you're right. They don't know that the word that they're using is a problem. So you got to be very gentle with them on this. Don't be a dick. Don't go, I can't believe you just like, listen, there's only a few things that you're allowed to reject a proof of loss on, and that's if it is a technical deficiency. All right, so are you just disagreeing with it? You're allowed to disagree with it. If that's what it is, then that's fine. Just let us know that you disagree with the amount of loss. But if you're rejecting it, then that's like, we never submitted it to you. Please clarify for us, and just try not to be a dick.
Matt, what is your stance on sending in a proof of loss on every single claim, even in states where it's not required?
I think it's a really good idea.
Why?
Because of the loss payment provisions. You trigger things in the policy.
That's the reason why I agree with that as well.
Yeah. If you don't trigger those things in the policy, then does the carrier ever really have to pay the claim?
Yeah.
There's an argument to be made that they don't. Now, a lot of the conditions will say after our request is submit to us a signed sworn proof of loss after our request, and if it says that, then you don't necessarily have to. You still have to prove the loss, but you don't necessarily have to submit a signed sworn proof of loss unless they request it. I still think you should.
And there's some policies where it puts the clock on the insurance company, like, hey, we have, a determination 60 days after the proof of loss is submitted. Mm-hmm. So, things like that.
All those things is triggers.
Yeah, exactly.
If you don't trigger that clause, then that time frame never starts.
Right.
There are a lot of policies that say you have to submit within X amount of days after notification of loss, and contractors are getting involved are missing that deadline for the policyholder. So there's a lot of leeway in that for a lot of states. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is definitely something an attorney would know better than me. But if there are states where they give the leeway, it says that it's required, but the only thing that the policyholder submitted was like an estimate or something from the contractor and some photos, would that be sufficient as them providing a proof of loss?
So I can say this. There's some states where if the insurance adjuster comes out to the property, that is enough to suffice the proof of loss, provision in the policy.
Because
like there's case law, like
there's no prejudice at that point. They've been able to see the damages themselves.
Yes.
So it becomes a prejudice issue, probably.
There you go. It's like, look, they came to the property, they inspected, they saw the damages. There's no need for a proof of loss, and there's case law in Georgia about that I've had to fight before. But if they do request a proof of loss, even if you've already submitted an estimate, even though they've done 3 inspections, just do it.
Yeah.
Get the proof of loss in.
So, and if your information has changed, you've learned some new information, or there's some hidden damage that you suddenly discovered and it increases the amount of loss, submit a new proof of loss.
Yep, absolutely. And also, I would say this to public adjusters, as Matt, said earlier, contractors do not fill out proofs of loss. So I agree with him 100%.
What can a contractor do?
Well, that's a whole nother. But what I'm telling is public adjusters, even attorneys or insureds that want to file their own proof of loss, at the end of it, just put a little note. Hey, if new information comes to light at a later date, I have the ability to revise or supplement this proof of loss.
You're basically reserving your right to amend the proof.
Exactly.
There is case law in a lot of states, maybe it's not all of them, where just because a proof of loss is submitted, it doesn't mean that it's a final proof, that it could always be amended, unless it specifies that it is the final proof of loss.
Yeah.
But having that kind of language definitely preserves your rights more than if you didn't have that kind of language in it.
I agree. You just always want to have that because, again, I like to prevent battles that I'm going to have to fight later on,
right,
even though I know I can be successful. So why not just put that language in there?
I agree.
Yeah.
There are some battles worth fighting, some hills worth dying on.
Yeah.
This isn't one of them.
No, it's not. And if you think about it this way, when I've had this argument from opposing counsel, from a carrier, say like, well, they did a sworn proof of loss for $500,000. But you can't change that. That's a sworn proof of loss of the damages itself. I say, well, what about a supplement? That's in the policy too. So you're contradicting yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm going to use what you said now. Does it say final sworn proof of loss? No. The date of this notary stamp is April 20th. We found this out in July. Yeah. So, there's just other things where I think
if you submit a proof of loss and new information comes out, 100% you need to file an updated version of that just to preserve that's part of your defense, I guess, if it ever makes it to litigation. But if you've never filed one, it isn't necessary for you to file an updated version. You should file these things every time, though, I think. The real question is when.
Well, that's a great question because strategically, and I know you probably have a list, but this is the one that pops in my head. Strategically, maybe you wait a little bit because you don't want to sticker shock the adjuster.
There are definitely claims I'd want to do that on. If I've got a tiny amount of damage that leads to a major claim, sticker shock. It's going to happen. They're going to think that we're unreasonable, and they're going to pull out all the stops to say that never happened, or it didn't happen during a policy period, or it's wear and tear set of hail or wind. Something along those lines. But if it's an average claim, I think it's important to do it right away. Immediately.
That's a good point. Like you said, I mean, on an
and in
average,
some states you're required to do it within a certain period of time anyway.
And states are like Florida is pretty strict on proofs of loss versus Georgia. But on an average claim, like you said, having those triggers with that proof of loss, it just makes sense.
So the proof of loss, for audience sake, is a document that labels, all the policyholder's information, who has rights to the money from the policy. So mortgage companies, people that have interest in the property, that kind of thing would be listed in there. And then the amount of loss that's being claimed, the actual cash value of the amount of loss that's being claimed, an itemized list of all the damages. You're saying what caused the loss. You're saying when it was caused. This is a formal statement. It doesn't have to be a format of any kind unless the policy specifies a format. Some policies specify they have to use their form to fill it out. But most of them don't require that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a specific format. You could literally submit all this in paragraph form and it would still be acceptable as a proof of loss. But I think that you should try to make it look a little bit more official than that and maybe put the term sworn proof of loss at the top or something along those lines with some signature brackets on the bottom. But is it necessary? If you're using Xactimate, you can spit out a federal flood proof of loss, the federal flood program. Is that the right term? Federal flood program? Why does that sound? NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program policy, National Flood Insurance Policy, NFIP.
You can go on FEMA and it has their own proofs of loss right there on a PDF form.
So theirs is built into Xactimate, though. You can actually spit out a proof of loss once you have an estimate, and it'll spit it out into the NFIP form. But that's not necessary either. There isn't a specific format unless the policy specifies. As long as it meets all of the conditions in the policy. You go to the conditions section, the duties after a loss, it'll say all the information you have to provide to the carrier. All that needs to be on that proof of loss form. And you have to have your amount of loss set. And you're signing off on this is how much we are claiming. Now, here's the cool thing. The reason you're submitting this is because you need to claim something in order to force them to investigate it. They only have to investigate what's claimed. This is an official statement. This is what we're claiming. Now, if you're a contractor and you're putting together all of the evidence for the policyholder to submit, you're not filling out this proof of loss document because this has got information on it. You have no reason to know who the mortgage company is. All this kind of there's all kinds of stuff. You're not a fiduciary. You don't have a right to a lot of this information. You shouldn't be filling this out. It is a legal document. But you can give them everything else. Do you think a policyholder could take all the other information, the estimate, the storm data, the third-party investigation from a industrial hygienist or an engineer or something like that, all of that documentation, put it together without that official form on top, and sign it as a sworn proof of loss?
I think you can, but I think it's going to be rejected.
I think it would be too.
I think it would be rejected.
I don't think you can call it a proof of loss necessarily. I know of some public adjusters that will submit an estimate and then specify that that is the proof of loss. And they have the homeowner sign off on it. And it's even written in their contract as that. I completely disagree with this plan.
Yeah, use a sworn proof of loss form.
Yeah.
Like, do that.
You can come up with your own. You could also go to unitedpolicyholders.org. uphelp.org is the website. United Policyholders has a form and instructions on how to fill it out. So if you're a contractor, policyholder would need to fill this out for themselves, you can go to that website. It's a nonprofit, and they show you how to fill it out, and you could use that. If you happen to be a Brelli customer, one of our sponsors for the show, Brelli has the ability for it to be filled out by the policyholder directly as well. So this is ways that a contractor can help a policyholder submit a proof of loss without them actually doing it for the policyholder and violating any kind of laws. So you could just, here's the website, here's what you do.
No regular homeowner would not know how to fill out a proof of loss. I mean, unless they really study it, right?
Yeah.
Because even ask, like, how is regular Joe that's never dealt with insurance in their life put an ACV value in a proof of loss?
That's a whole...
How is that even possible?
I want our next podcast to be about that topic. That is a big topic.
Yep.
We're going to come back to that. That's our next one, because that's a big deal, and we'll spend another hour on this episode on it. We don't want to do that.
Can I say
we've already doubled down on different topics on this one?
Can I say my favorite thing about a proof of loss?
Yeah.
Is when it says that what time.
Yeah, how do you know what time it happened?
Oh, at 9:06 p.m. That's
it's storm
funny.
data comes back and it's 12:47 a.m. and they put the date before as the date. And it's like, well, it was that night.
I love it.
Technically, it was the other day's morning, and you've just screwed it all up. But whatever. Here's a question for you. If the insurance company says you have to use our form, and then they submit that form. There are states that require them to give that form in advance within a certain period of time if they're going to require it to be done.
Yep.
and then they don't give it to the policyholder within that period of time, they can technically no longer require the policyholder to submit it, correct?
Yes, if in the policy it says that they are to provide this form within 30 days, and if they don't,
Or statutory.
okay,
Like,
they were
so Georgia,
statutory.
for example, and forgive me if I'm wrong, I think it's 15 days. In the Georgia statutes, if they're going to require this form to be, any form to be utilized, then they have to provide it within 15 days of notice of loss. So for a long time in Georgia, when I was working in Georgia, auto owners would hand a blank proof of loss to somebody when they went and did the investigation.
Yeah.
If they didn't provide that within that period of time, and they said, well, we're requiring a proof of loss, they could no longer require it. But what if they ask for it anyway, 60 days later, but they never provided the form? Is that a hill worth dying on?
I go back to just fill out the proof of loss.
I agree.
Just do it.
Why do we fight everything?
You are making your job harder by fighting everything.
Just go
do it.
with it, man. Sometimes
do
it's
it.
just better to work with that other person on the other side. You can work hand in hand. If they need that to get it approved, give it to them.
Right.
Why are you messing around? You're messing with somebody else's livelihood here. The policyholder needs to be protected. Don't fight every battle. My God, people.
Hey, you got to think about, because what you're doing is you're putting ego in front of your client. Do what's best for your client. Do the least path of resistance to get this client what they deserve. Not this whole ego battle. Oh, and I think what the language you're talking about is it says that an insurance company has 15 days to provide forms to proceed with the insurance claim once requested. So once those documents are requested.
Oh, it's once requested,
they
not
have
at the
15
start?
days.
Okay.
That's Unfair Claim Settlement Practice Act. But hey, just fill out the proof of loss.
Do it. Yeah, there's
Just
no
do
reason.
it.
All right, so let me ask you a follow-up then. If they do provide the form, but the carrier filled it out, is that okay?
That is, I swear before we were going to end on this topic, I was going to bring up something that I've seen lately. And carriers are, let's say, they're wanting to pay for half a roof. Mm-hmm. They're sending the insured an estimate and saying, we're going to pay you for this, but only if you sign this sworn proof of loss that we filled out. And they have it filled out for the partial roof.
It's got the amount of loss already written in there. It's not editable.
Right. And so a lot of these homeowners or commercial building owners, this is the one I saw a couple days ago, they sign off on it like, oh, okay, I got a check from the insurance company getting paid.
Little did they know that they just agreed to that amount of loss.
And they just did a sword and agreed to that amount of loss. That kind of goes back on our conversation of it. I think you can overcome it, but it could be a defense that the insurance company is saying they've already agreed to this.
Dude, that's something that probably is going to end up needing an attorney to overcome.
Yeah.
Whether it's real or not, it's not a final proof of loss. I think it's extremely inappropriate for a carrier to submit a proof of loss form to a policyholder already filled out. I think it's very inappropriate.
With an estimate.
And
they're saying, we will pay you once you sign this.
It'd be even worse if they sent it with a release.
Well, yeah, that would definitely.
Now, if there is no release, then it is not a full and final ever. Because the release is when you're saying we'll never supplement for any more money.
Correct.
Upon new information being discovered.
Correct.
So the argument is there to overcome this, but they're going to force it into litigation more often than not.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And honestly, a lot of people would back down from that. If an insurance company's like, oh, no, you did a sworn proof of loss, sir. Like, this claim is over with. They're like, I messed up. Shucks.
So as a public adjuster, when we had that in, we sent back and said, we disagree with the amount of loss that you have on here. Can you send us a blank form? And that's all that we said. We weren't a dick to them, even though I think it's very inappropriate. And behind scenes, I was cursing a lot. But don't be a dick to the carrier. Most of the time, the adjusters that are doing this, they don't know any better. They're not. Most adjusters you're dealing with are just people. They're doing their job. And they're doing their job to the best of their ability. They're not trying to hurt anybody. A lot of times they don't realize that what they're doing could potentially hurt the policyholder. So don't assume that they're assholes.
Agreed. And you've always said that.
Yeah,
Hey,
it's true.
Everybody's human. And again, You know, there are some adjusters that when you see on a file, you're like, oh my gosh, I already know it's going to be denied. But the majority of them, it's not that way.
Yeah.
They want to work with you, right?
There's definitely assholes out there.
There's
But
some
asshole
that
PAs
doesn't
and asshole
matter.
contractors out there too. And they, you know, as much as we're really skeptical about the motivations behind a lot of the carriers and stuff and the adjusters of what it is they're doing, a lot of times they just don't know. And it's probably the same way for the public adjusters in their eyes. You know, perception is a funny thing.
Yeah.
If I was an insurance company and I saw a lot of fraud from public adjusters, I would get a bad taste in my mouth for public adjusters.
Yeah, absolutely.
We get a bad taste in our mouths about adjusters a lot of times on this side because we see a lot of abuse on this side as well, and we start to mentally group you all together as everybody's doing that. We're here to say, no, the majority don't do that, but our minds work that way where we want to say, be very careful. This is someone that is a threat. We need to make sure that we are very skeptical about everything they do because they have power and they've hurt us in the past. Well, this adjuster didn't do that. It was this other adjuster. And it's really hard for us to separate that out in our minds. On both sides, this is an issue.
It is.
So, you know, we can work together, guys. So it is something where we can literally hold an adjuster's hands symbiotically to help a policyholder out without getting that guy fired.
Yep.
It can happen, but we have to get rid of a lot of our prejudice on things that have happened in the past with other people to make that work.
Right. Right.
So that's, I don't know what that is. Psychology 101, I guess. I don't know. Anyway. Proof of loss. Anything more we should say about proof of loss?
No, I think hit on it. There was one time I sat in a conference and an attorney stood up and went through a proof of loss for an hour. I fell asleep. It was like so boring. We actually made it a little exciting, but it's important because it's a part, it's in every, I want to say every policy. Every policy I've seen, it has some type of proof of loss language, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's a form that's been used since insurance has started, so it's important. And I think we hit all the, main parts of this.
You know, I think we didn't do?
What?
Say what the hell it was. A proof of loss is literally just all the stuff that proves the loss, because that's the step that the policyholder must take in order to gain any coverages first.
Can I say this? Were you done?
Yeah.
I was sitting in a class with Matt not too long ago, and we were teaching, and people, public adjusters, when they submit a proof of loss, and I'm guilty of this too, we submit the proof of loss with an estimate, and that's it. Matt brought up a good point. He's like, why aren't you putting weather data in there? Why aren't you putting pictures of this damage? Why aren't you putting effective client statements in this documentation? If you think about it, it says proof of loss. Give them the proof. So I thought that was great, and everybody that's listening to this, those are kind of nuggets you get when you go to Matt's class, and it's effective. It works. You know, when they actually see the damage, when they see the weather data, when they have a statement from the homeowner saying, I was sitting on my sofa and I heard hail hitting my roof. Like this is all great stuff that it's going. I'm not saying, oh, you do this is 100% going to work every time. The probability of that claim getting paid and approved goes up.
Especially if you submit all that up front.
Yeah, there you go.
From the beginning.
So I wanted to leave everybody with that because it's a great nugget that I've heard from Matt. So now our proofs of loss went from one page with a 15-page estimate to one page in about 90 other documents. Yeah. I mean, really, all the pictures we have.
Right? It's all the evidence.
Right.
It's there. So now it helps out. Now, just to tie it all together, if that is all part of the proof of loss, then it all needs to be there for the policyholder to view before they sign.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, because it's part of that packet.
Correct.
So they're not just signing off on the one form. They're seeing everything that's there. They might only sign that top page, but they're seeing everything that's attached to it, and they're agreeing to all that as a part of that proof of loss.
You know, even if you want to play some CYA, maybe you have like an index up front showing, hey, a part of this proof of loss is going to be an estimate, documentation, weather data, statements, things like that, just so everybody's on the same page. But yes, when the policyholder notarizes this document, they have to be agreeing with everything that's being submitted.
All right, I got one more thing to add to it.
Let's go.
This is a big topic. So a proof of loss is all those things, but an insurance adjuster isn't going to read through 90-something pages. They're just not. So what I used to do and what I teach people to do now is to put together a summary that goes as the second page with bullet points. People like reading bullet points because it summarizes everything. AI is summarizing everything for us these days anyway, and we're reading very simplified versions of everything. If you just put bullet points of the really important information that is attached, and that is the second page, that will make things a lot easier for them to know where to go to look. An index works out really well for that too, but if you have those bullet points there, it's just simpler for the adjuster to go, okay, I understand what it is I'm about to look at without having to flip through every single page.
I love that. And you can have a templated summary of your proof of loss. Does everybody remember being in middle school and you had to take a test at 2 p.m. on a book you never read? You go to Spark Notes. You remember that?
Right. Yeah. I did Cliff Notes.
So Cliff, whatever it was called.
You're younger than me.
Whatever it was called. That's what the adjusters want to see, right?
Yeah, it is.
You know,
they want because no one's going to read. When they get an engineer report, they don't read the whole report. They read just the conclusion section. It's bullet points. It's the bullet points that people will read. Put it at the top so it's easy for them to find. They'll probably read that and they'll stop. And that's fine. If they read that, they get the most important information. If they want to verify that information, they know where to go in it.
I guarantee you, the individuals that you've taught and you've shared this information with about this proof of loss, they've submitted it to an adjuster. An adjuster is sitting at the desk and just looks at it, looks at the summary, sees 90 pages, and they say, wow, this is impressive. I'm gonna approve this claim.
Yeah.
they mean business. Like
they do approve them.
Yeah.
They approve them on the spot a lot of times without ever sending anybody out. It happens. But you have to have good documentation for that.
Right.
So, I mean, this is something that we teach at the Building Experts Institute as well. And we even have templated inspection reports so that people can act as experts with bullet point summaries at the beginning of this thing. And these are all very good documents to put in there. It explains everything. That proof of loss, if it's done properly, or your packet of proof, if you don't want to call it the proof of loss, so it's not that specific form if you're a contractor, your packet of proof sets the narrative, man. If this is how everything's supposed to go, you could even define damage in your packet. And because that's what you claimed, they have to investigate that. I think we're going to end it there because I just opened up a whole second topic that could be a whole nother hour. But I think we've got enough for proof of loss as a general for now.
This is the most exciting proof of loss conversation I've ever heard in my career.
Yeah.
Good stuff. People are snoring usually when people talk about proof of loss. This was some good information.
There's good stuff in that.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Well, you're welcome.